Hey there, I'm David Schloss. I'm at Windsong Farm in beautiful Texas. We're outside of Austin with Sony for a media event to test some of their new cameras, including the Sony a99 Mark II. I want to talk a little bit about the camera. This is the first time anyone's had the ability to play with a camera in the United States. So it was announced at Photokina in 2016. It has just started shipping in Europe. As of recording this video, it has not landed in the US yet. These models, from what we know, are as close to production as possible without being an actual production camera. I tested the a99, which came before it. It was a very good camera system. It wasn't really something that might make you switch brands. It was the kind of camera that if you had been a longtime Sony shooter, you might have been really happy with. But if you're a Nikon or a Canon SLR person, the chances were not very great that you would jump over to the a99. The a99 Mark II kind of changes the game. It's got a price point of about $3,200 in the US, and it has a lot of the features that the Pro SLRs from Nikon and Canon have right now, and some features that they don't have. So to talk first about some of the things it has that the other cameras don't have, the a99 Mark II sports a 42 megapixel sensor. So to put that in comparison, the D5, the 1DX Mark II, they're around 20 megapixel sensors. So sensor size, twice the resolution as those cameras. It's also got a Sony designed chip, which is great in low light, so it's got a really good high ISO performance. Sony has also redesigned the chip to get all the image data off of the sensor as fast as possible, which means that this camera can shoot at 12 frames a second in continuous autofocus. That's the same autofocus rate that the top-end 1DX Mark II can shoot in continuous autofocus. It's pretty amazing to use a camera that's half the price of the Pro SLRs with these features. The other interesting thing about the camera, it's what's called an SLT. So it's got a semi-translucent mirror inside the camera, which means that the light passes through, and instead of bouncing up to an optical viewfinder like in an SLR, part of the light goes up to a separate phase detect sensor, and the rest of the light comes right through to the sensor. So there's a couple of interesting things about that. In this camera, there's a separate phase detect sensor that is not on the chip. And then there's hundreds of AF points on the sensor, and the two of them work together, which means that no matter what the camera is doing, there's something doing phase detect. It gives the camera really good predictive focus. It really makes it easy to shoot sport, shoot portraiture with this. The camera we've been testing for a couple of days, it is barely missing shots. We were shooting in a skate park. I was able to take the camera with a low wide angle lens, get really low down, and just shoot, and then have it lock onto the subject and follow it for a full 12 frames a second. Very little back focus, very little missing the subject. It has face detect on here, so I can also just point it at the subject and it will find the face. And it has lock-on focus, and so what you do is you find your subject, and then as the subject moves around in the frame, it will follow it. Now, anybody who's been working with the Nikon D series cameras for a while, or the Canon 1D series, especially if you're a sports photographer, you're used to taking the focus point, like a single point, putting on a person and following them as they move back and forth. One of the interesting things about working with a camera with more predictive focus is that the camera really decides where it wants to focus, what the active focus is, and then it follows that subject. So that's very powerful if you're trying to follow somebody around and you don't have time to move the focus points. It takes a little bit of getting used to if you're used to manually dropping something on a person and then following them around by panning. However, the camera does have the D-pad on the back of the camera that allows you to set a single or multiple points, drop those points on the subject. It also has an expanded lock mode, so if you drop that onto the subject and the subject moves, it will follow around without having to recompose. The only downsides of working with a system that this is so good in predictive focus, if you get in something like a sports situation where there's a lot of people crowding around together and you want to follow just the key person in the play, you're going to have to switch modes from the focusing mode or switch back to the single point mode, or really set the camera up so that it is doing the focus switching that you want, depending on the situation. So the pluses in that, it's much more predictive than working with SLRs. The downside is complicated scenes, you might have to override just the smartness of the camera and go back to doing it yourself. Personally, I like to have a camera that has more intelligence than I do. That's not particularly difficult. But when it comes to autofocus, I really like to be able to have the camera track things, and then when I want specific overriding capabilities, I'm going to override it. So we've only so far been able to look at the JPEGs from the camera. The RAW converter is not available as of this press junket because the camera has not shown up in the United States. We're looking forward to that. The JPEGs so far have been incredibly sharp. They've been incredibly clean. Very little post-production work on the JPEGs. I don't know if the RAW files are going to end up looking the same. So for you video shooters, here's where this becomes a really compelling camera. The A99 Mark II has full 4K video. It does 4K out through the HDMI port, which means you can use an external recorder to capture uncompressed 4K video. This is something that you are not able to do with the new Nikon 5D, the Canon 1DX Mark II, or the 5D Mark IV. All of those cameras are limited in what they can do out of the HDMI port. So people have been moving to Sony mirrorless cameras for some time because of the video capabilities of that, the uncompressed video out, it's 10-bit video, that is now in this more powerful, higher performance camera system. So the question is this enough to make people switch? And I guess we're going to have to see about that. It's been a while since Sony made an Alpha series camera, so a lot of people thought that the camera line was coming to an end while Sony was making the mirrorless cameras. This camera breathes a little bit new life into the Alpha line. There's certainly a ton of lenses available, so glass isn't going to be a determining factor for somebody if they wanted to pick this camera up. I think for event photographers, I think for wedding photographers, I think that this is a very compelling system. You have a camera that is lighter than the top of the line DSLRs. At a cheaper price point, it's able to do some pretty impressive things. If you're shooting video, this is naturally going to be a camera that you're going to be drawn to. If you're a wedding photographer and you're doing the still work and some motion capture, the 4K features in this are really going to be enough to justify the price. We're going to have an entire review of the camera when the production models are shipping in the United States. We'll get them for a couple of weeks. We'll shoot more tests. So far, been very impressed with the performance of the camera, the image quality. There really aren't any downsides to speak of at this point. I'm sure we'll find someone when we are looking at them. If you want more information on Sony's cameras, you can check out the Sony website or the Sony Alpha Universe website. If you want some more information on our reviews, you can look here on our YouTube channel, or you can find us at digitalphotopro.com or outdoorphotographer.com. Thanks so much for watching.